London, 1869. The candlelight trembled when Lady Rosalind Fairfax raised her voice. She shouldn't have done it, she knew perfectly well. But the words had already escaped her lips, cutting through the perfumed air of the ballroom like a sharp blade slicing through silk. The scent of jasmine and beeswax that moments before had seemed pleasant now weighed heavy, suffocating, as silence spread. "With all due respect, Your Grace," her voice sounded too clear, too firm. "You are completely mistaken." Silence descended like heavy snow. 300 pairs of eyes turned to her. The string quartet stopped mid-musical phrase, the violinist's bow frozen in the air. Even the clinking of champagne glasses ceased. Rosalind could hear her own heart pounding in her ears, so loud it seemed impossible that others couldn't hear it too. And then he looked at her. Sebastian Hartwell, Duke of Greystone, turned his head slowly, like a predator that had just detected movement where there should be no life. His eyes, of a stormy gray that had already made experienced lords lower their heads, fixed on Rosalind with an intensity that should have made her retreat. Candlelight danced across his face, accentuating the hard line of his jaw, the severity of his compressed lips. But she did not retreat. She held his gaze across the distance separating them, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs like a bird in a cage too small. The hand holding her fan trembled, just once, but she tightened her fingers until her knuckles turned white and the trembling stopped. His lips didn't move. They didn't need to. That look said everything. "How dare you?" Rosalind raised her chin an inch. Her own eyes, green as spring leaves, answered in silence. "I dare." Something changed in the air, something dangerous and irreversible, like the first crack in a lake's ice during the thaw. The Duke took a step forward. "Lady Fairfax," his voice was low, controlled, lethal. "The entire room awaits your elucidation." It wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge, a duel with words instead of swords. Rosalind felt her aunt's hand squeeze her arm in silent warning. She felt the gazes of the matrons around her, hungry for scandal, thirsty for someone's fall to entertain their tedious afternoons. She felt the weight of 24 years of impeccable education, telling her to lower her eyes, curtsy, beg forgiveness. Instead, she spoke. "Your Grace's factories employ children of 6 years, 16 hours a day. You called this opportunity. I call it cruelty disguised as charity." The shock was audible, a collective gasp, like wind crossing wheat. Sebastian Hartwell didn't blink, didn't look away. He crossed the room with measured, deliberate steps, each movement a demonstration of contained power. The sound of his boots against the marble echoed like drum beats. The crowd parted like the sea before Moses, silk dresses whispering as they hastily moved aside. He stopped 2 steps from her, so close that Rosalind could see the texture of his perfectly tied cravat, the impeccable cut of his black coat, the reflection of candles in his storm-gray eyes. She could feel the heat emanating from him, or was it her own blood boiling in her veins? "And you, miss," he murmured, voice so low only she could hear, "believe you know better than I what is cruel?" There was something more in that look, something beyond anger or arrogance, a pain so ancient and deep that for an instant Rosalind forgot to breathe. It was like looking at a wound that had never healed, only been covered by layers of ice and studied indifference. But the magic broke when he took a step back, inclined his head in false courtesy, and said loudly enough for all to hear, "How fascinating! An expert in morality where one least expects to find one." The audience laughed, nervous, servile, cruel. Rosalind didn't lower her eyes, not when he turned and crossed the room, his coat billowing behind him like a cape of shadows. Not when the ladies began to whisper behind their fans, venomous words disguised as concern. Not when her aunt pulled her outside, fingers digging into her arm, whispering about social ruin and madness. Only when she reached the carriage, protected by the darkness of the London night and the smell of old leather and horse, did she allow her knees to tremble. She had defied the most powerful man in England. And the worst part, the absolutely terrifying part, was that a part of her wanted to do it again. Sebastian didn't sleep that night. He remained in his library, a glass of cognac untouched on the table, watching the flames of the fireplace devour oak logs. The fire crackled. Shadows danced on the shelves filled with leather-bound volumes he no longer read. The grandfather clock marked the hours with relentless beats, each tick a reminder of time wasted in useless vigil. And he couldn't stop seeing those defiant green eyes. How had she dared? No lord had spoken to him that way in 10 years. No lady had ever stared at him without lowering her gaze, without that reverence mixed with fear he had come to accept as inevitable. And yet that girl with a simple dress and no important jewels had challenged him before 300 witnesses. He should be furious. Instead, he felt alive. For the first time in 3 years, something besides ashes moved in his chest. A spark. Perhaps anger. Perhaps curiosity. Something that made his blood run faster, that warmed the perpetual coldness inhabiting his bones. He hated the sensation. 2 days later, he found her at the Royal Academy of Arts. It wasn't intentional. At least that's what he told himself. He simply needed to see the new Turner exhibition. The fact that he had heard Lady Pemberton mention casually during tea that her impoverished niece would visit the gallery that morning was pure coincidence. The fact that he had dismissed 2 important commitments to be there exactly at 10 o'clock was also irrelevant. Rosalind stood before a painting of a maritime storm, completely absorbed. Morning light entering through the tall windows bathed her profile in golden tones, revealing the delicate curve of her neck, the absolute concentration on her face. She wore a simple gray dress, reformed more than once by what his trained eyes detected. The fabric slightly lighter where it had been adjusted, the cuffs discreetly mended. Her brown hair was pinned practically, not elegantly, with some rebellious strands escaping to frame her face. No lady's companion accompanied her. She was completely alone. Wrong. Improper. Dangerous for her reputation. Sebastian approached in silence, his steps muffled by the thick carpet, standing beside her. She didn't notice immediately, hypnotized by the violent brushstrokes that captured the chaos of furious waves rising against a black sky charged with fury. "Turner understands storms," he said calmly. She turned with a start, eyes wide. She recognized him instantly. Color fled from her face like a receding tide, then returned in a charming blush that spread from her cheeks to the base of her neck. "Your Grace," she began, voice less firm than at the ball. "Won't you curtsy?" Yes, naturally. Liar." The word came out soft, almost amused. Rosalind blinked, disconcerted, searching for some sign of anger or disdain in his face. She found none, just interest, curiosity perhaps. Sebastian leaned slightly, maintaining appropriate distance, but letting his voice drop to an intimate tone. "You don't curtsy. Not really. You execute the movement because you must, but your gaze remains rebellious." He paused, studying her. "It's fascinating. I'm not a specimen for study, sir. No, you're something far more dangerous." The air between them vibrated. Rosalind should move away, call her aunt waiting in the carriage. The rules of propriety were clear. A young lady should never be alone with a gentleman, especially in such an isolated place in the gallery. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Why hasn't your Grace smiled in 3 years?" The effect was immediate. Sebastian froze. His stormy eyes darkened to almost black, and something dangerous crossed his face, pain so intense it seemed physical. For a moment, Rosalind feared she had gone too far, had touched a wound that should never have been exposed. "Choose your blows carefully, Lady Fairfax." His voice was dangerously low. "Not all wounds are visible." "I know," she replied softly. "I lost my father 8 months ago. He died believing he had failed us." She swallowed hard, feeling the familiar burn of unshed tears. "So yes, Your Grace, I know about invisible wounds." Something crossed his face. Surprise. Perhaps understanding. The aristocratic mask wavered, just for a second, and beneath it, Rosalind glimpsed the man. Not the title, not the power, but the broken person trying to hold the pieces together. Sebastian extended his hand, not to touch her, but pointing to the painting. Turner painted this after surviving a shipwreck. He tied himself to the mast to feel the storm, nearly died. His eyes didn't leave hers. Some of us remain trapped in storms, Lady Fairfax, and tying oneself to the mast is the only way not to be swept away. Or, said Rosalind calmly, you could let go and learn to swim. The silence that followed was different, not hostile, not uncomfortable, charged with possibility, like air before a summer storm, heavy, electric, inevitable. Your Grace, the shrill voice cut through the moment like scissors through silk. Lady Helena Montrose, the Duke's cousin, entered the gallery like a perfumed breeze, all blue silk and calculated smiles. Her high-heeled shoes clicked against the marble floor, announcing her presence with proprietary authority. What a wonderful surprise to find you here. And Lady Fairfax as well, I imagine. Her tone made it clear she imagined nothing at all, and that Rosalind's presence was decidedly inconvenient. Sebastian took a step back, his expression returning to the perfect aristocratic mask. The transformation was instantaneous. The man disappeared, the Duke returned. Rosalind felt the loss like a cold breeze on a warm day. Lady Helena. Lady Fairfax was sharing interesting perspectives on Turner. How delightful! Helena intertwined her arm with his possessively, fingers gripping the fabric of his coat like claws wrapped in lace gloves. But I fear we have an appointment with the Marquis of Aldborough. Remember? There was no appointment. Rosalind saw clearly the lie in Helena's glittering eyes, saw the way she pulled Sebastian toward the exit with barely disguised urgency. She also saw, for a fraction of a second, his hesitation. Then Sebastian nodded, looked at Rosalind one last time, a look that promised something unspoken, and said, "Until soon, Lady Fairfax." It wasn't a farewell. It was a promise. When she was alone, Rosalind realized her hands were trembling. She looked again at the storm painting, the dark waves threatening to swallow the ship, the sky heavy with contained fury. Learn to swim, she had said, but what if she was already drowning? From that day on, Sebastian was everywhere. Not obviously, never obviously, but Rosalind began to notice him. At the opera, in a box that offered perfect view of hers, his silhouette outlined against the red velvet, motionless as a statue while everyone around conversed. In Hyde Park during her morning walk, mounted on a black stallion that seemed made of shadows, always maintaining respectful distance, but undeniably present. At the bookshop in Piccadilly, where she bought new volumes of poetry, leafing through books he never took, his eyes invariably finding hers through the shelves. He never approached, just watched. It was disconcerting, exciting, absolutely inappropriate. And she couldn't stop looking for him in the places she frequented. Her eyes automatically sought that tall, dark figure, that aristocratic bearing impossible to mistake. Her heart accelerated when she found him. It sank in disappointment when he wasn't there. The invitation arrived on a rainy April afternoon. The Duke of Greystone has the honor of inviting Lady Fairfax for tea at his residence, accompanied by appropriate chaperone, Wednesday at 4 o'clock. Aunt Agatha nearly fainted. It's a trap. He intends to humiliate you, dear. Refuse immediately. But Rosalind looked at the expensive paper, smooth cream beneath her fingers, the perfect calligraphy with its elegant slanted letters, the wax seal with the ducal coat of arms pressed carefully. There was something there, a hesitation in the pen's pressure on certain words, a small smudge where he had restarted, as if choosing and discarding phrases before deciding. He had written it himself, not a secretary. "I'll accept," she said calmly. "Rosalind, with you as chaperone, naturally." She smiled weakly. "Where's the danger in taking tea?" "Everywhere," whispered her heart. The days passed slowly for Rosalind until the arrival of the day when she would take tea at the Duke's residence. Each morning seemed to drag, each afternoon stretched endlessly. She changed dresses 3 times on Wednesday, finally choosing a simple but well-cut dark blue, the best she owned without being pretentious. Greystone Mansion dominated Park Lane, like a fortress of marble and pride. Rosalind climbed the steps with trembling knees but raised head, Aunt Agatha muttering nervously beside her, rosary hidden in her gloved hand. The butler, a 60-year-old man with posture straighter than any soldier, conducted them through corridors that smelled of beeswax and old roses. The halls were magnificent but curiously lifeless, like a museum instead of a home. Portraits of ancestors watched them from the walls with painted eyes that seemed to judge each step. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the ticking of invisible clocks and the whisper of their skirts against the polished marble floor. Sebastian awaited them in the winter garden. Standing against the afternoon light crossing through the glass, he seemed less duke and more man. He wore only a vest over his shirt, no coat. His sleeves were slightly rolled up, revealing strong and surprisingly tanned forearms, evidence that he didn't spend all his time in closed rooms. A white rose rested on the table beside ivory chess pieces, its perfect petals contrasting with the dark wood of the board. "Lady Fairfax, Lady Agatha." He bowed. "Thank you for coming." Aunt Agatha curtsied so deeply she nearly lost her balance. Rosalind limited herself to a respectful but not servile nod. His lips curved, almost a smile. "Lady Agatha, I took the liberty of asking the housekeeper to prepare a special selection of ginger biscuits. I believe they're your favorites?" Agatha blushed with surprised pleasure. "How did he know?" "The housekeeper awaits you in the tea room to discuss the recipe." He continued softly. "If you'll permit me a few moments with Lady Fairfax for business regarding her late father's estate. The doors will remain open naturally." It was so skillfully done that Agatha couldn't refuse without appearing rude. She cast a worried look at Rosalind, who nodded reassuringly, and then allowed herself to be led away, still clutching the rosary like a talisman against invisible dangers. Silence descended like a heavy velvet curtain. "That was manipulation worthy of Machiavelli, Your Grace," said Rosalind calmly. "I learned from the best." He indicated the chair. "Please sit." She sat, spine straight, gloved hands folded in her lap. Sebastian remained standing, creating deliberate disadvantage. Rosalind understood. He didn't want to be above her. But what did he want? "Do you play chess, Lady Fairfax?" The question caught her off guard. "I do." Well enough to know when I'm being positioned on an invisible board." This time he smiled, briefly, like sun breaking through clouds. It was so unexpected that Rosalind's heart leaped. The smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines, revealing the man he perhaps once had been before 3 years of mourning hardened him. "Perceptive," he murmured, finally sitting across the table from her. "Very well, cards on the table." His eyes met hers. "Why did you challenge me that night?" "Because you were wrong. Many men are wrong. You don't challenge them all publicly." Rosalind hesitated. The truth was complicated, painful. Her father had lost everything investing in modern businesses that exploited workers. He had died broken and guilty. She had vowed to do differently. Sebastian observed her hesitation and, surprisingly, spoke first. "They weren't 6 years old," he said calmly. "The children in my factories, they were 10, some 9. Rosalind felt anger rise. "Does the difference of 3 years make it acceptable?" "No." The answer came quick, firm. "You're right. I clung to that detail because it was easier than admitting the greater truth. I failed them." His fingers drummed the table once, the only evidence of nervousness. "I delegated management to the foreman, didn't ask questions, didn't want to know." "That's worse," she whispered, choosing not to see. "I know." He held her gaze, not hiding from the condemnation he saw there. "I have no excuse. I went through some bad times and closed myself off. To everything, to everyone. It was easier to sign papers, receive profits, and not think about anything else." Silence weighed between them. "And now?" asked Rosalind, voice softer but still challenging. "Now." Sebastian took a deep breath. 8-hour workdays. No children under 12 years. Mandatory school for all who work. 2 hours a day. Paid by me. Wages increased by 20%. He paused. 3 lords did the same. 2 opened orphanages. His eyes burned into hers. Because you had courage I didn't have. Rosalind felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't victory. It was something more complex. Relief mixed with sadness for the lost time, for the children who suffered before. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know that your challenge mattered. He leaned slightly forward. And because I want you to understand, I'm not the man you faced at that ball. Or perhaps, he hesitated. Perhaps I am, and I had simply forgotten. Because silence is complicity, said Rosalind finally, completing the conversation they had begun. And I've been a silent accomplice for too long. Sebastian studied her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but strangely wasn't. Do you know what your courage caused? Besides the changes I mentioned? My social ruin? Admiration, he corrected softly. Letters from workers thanking anonymously. Mothers blessing your name in churches you'll never visit. His voice descended. And a dead duke realizing that perhaps there's still reason to be alive. Rosalind blinked, stunned by the raw vulnerability in those words. Your Grace. Sebastian, he interrupted. When we're alone, please call me Sebastian. The name sounded too intimate, too dangerous. I can't. You can. His voice dropped to a whisper. Rosalind. The way he said her name, slowly, tasting each syllable like rare wine, made something melt inside her. This was wrong. He was a duke. She was nobody. A closed widower. A lady with no future. There was a social abyss between them that no factory reform could cross. And yet, when he extended his hand across the chessboard, not touching, just offering, palm up in a gesture of surrender, she found her own hand moving to meet it. Their fingers brushed, just their index fingers, separated by the silk of their gloves. The touch burned. I'm playing dangerously, Your Grace, she whispered. Sebastian, he corrected again, eyes locked on hers. And so am I. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made them pull back simultaneously. When Agatha returned, chattering animatedly about recipes and the housekeeper's kindness, she found them sitting appropriately, discussing Victorian poetry with the formality the situation required. But the white rose that Sebastian pressed into Rosalind's hand upon farewell, hidden in the folds of her skirt where no one would see, soft and fragrant petals against her fingers, was still warm from his fingers. That night, Rosalind placed it between the pages of her favorite book, Jane Eyre, marking the page where Rochester finally confesses his love. She observed the flower through candlelight, so delicate and perfect it seemed impossible it would last. And she knew, with frightening certainty, that she was lost. Sebastian stood in his private wing, a place where no lady was ever admitted, looking at the portrait he hid from visitors. Isabel's delicate face stared back at him, hair blonde as wheat in the sun, pale blue eyes that always seemed to look beyond him to something he could never reach, a soft smile that never truly reached her eyes. His late wife. The painting had been done 6 months after their wedding, when he still had hope that perhaps they could find happiness, if not love. The artist had perfectly captured that ethereal quality of hers, as if she were already half absent, half ghost even before dying. They married when he was 26, she 19. An arranged marriage, appropriate, without love, but without cruelty. Isabel had been sweet, obedient, perfectly adequate, and completely unhappy. He had tried. For 2 years he had tried to make her genuinely smile. He'd bought jewels she wore once and stored away. He'd taken her on trips she endured in polite silence. He'd offered freedom she didn't know how to use. But there was something broken in her from the beginning, a melancholy no wealth could cure, a sadness no kindness could reach, an emptiness no attention could fill. Then she became pregnant. Sebastian remembered the hope he felt. A baby, new life. Perhaps a child would give Isabel purpose, something to love when she clearly couldn't love him. Perhaps, but the birth had been brutal. 36 hours of agony. The doctors tried everything. Forceps, different positions, bloodletting that left Isabel even paler. He held her hand, feeling the delicate bones beneath cold, damp skin, whispered promises he couldn't keep. He watched life drain from her along with so much blood it stained the sheets from white to red to black. The baby was born dead, a boy, perfect and silent. Tiny fingers curled, dark lashes against porcelain cheeks, bluish lips that would never breathe. Isabel followed him 2 hours later, her last whispers being, finally free. Not from him, from life. Sebastian had never cried. He just closed himself off, had all the mirrors covered, dressed in black, put on mourning like armor, and vowed never to feel again. Pain was vulnerability. Love was risk. Both were luxuries he couldn't afford. Until green eyes challenged him in a ballroom. Damn it. He turned away from the portrait, leaving Isabel to the shadows where she had always preferred to be. Rain continued falling, transforming the world outside into a gray and melancholy blur. He shouldn't have gone to the orphanage that day. He had dozens of urgent matters, contracts to review, tenants to meet, Parliament demanding his presence. But it had been several weeks since his last inspection, so something in him, something Rosalind had awakened, something that refused to go back to sleep, insisted on seeing personally. The building was clean, well-maintained. The children wore adequate clothes, mended but clean. There was enough food, qualified teachers, heating in the cold months. He financed everything anonymously. No one needed to know that the cold Duke of Greystone had a weakness for orphans. Your Grace, the matron curtsied, work-roughened hands nervously intertwined. We have a new resident, an abandoned baby found on the steps of St. Paul's, only 3 months old. She hesitated, biting her lip. He cries a lot, day and night. We can't calm him. Sebastian shouldn't ask, shouldn't care. Babies cried. That's what they did. It wasn't his problem. Take me to him. The baby was in the nursery, wrapped in worn but clean white blankets, his face red and contorted in silent anguish. His tiny lungs seemed to have no more strength to cry, just irregular sniffles, as if he had given up asking for help. Something broke in Sebastian's chest. Without thinking, he extended his arms. The nurse hesitated, looking at the expensive clothes, the gloved hands that had never held a child. Then, carefully, she placed the baby in them. The boy was so light, so fragile, so alive. Warm where his son had been cold, breathing where his son had remained silent, crying, even if weakly, where his son had never made a sound. Sebastian sat in the worn rocking chair, holding him awkwardly. The baby sniffled, then nestled against the expensive coat, finding warmth. The small fingers gripped the wool fabric, clutching as if Sebastian were the only solid thing in a terrible and frightening world. And for the first time in 3 years, Sebastian felt tears burn his eyes. Your Grace? The voice made him turn sharply. Rosalind stood in the doorway, hair damp from rain sticking to her forehead and cheeks, wrapped in a simple cape that had seen better days. She carried a basket of bread obviously brought from home, probably baked by herself, knowing her circumstances. Her eyes widened at seeing him, Sebastian Hartwell, the untouchable Duke of Greystone, holding an orphan baby with unshed tears glistening on his lashes. She began, then stopped, understanding crossing her face like dawn. Sebastian should say something. Some cold aristocratic explanation, some excuse about inspecting his properties, fulfilling patron's duty. Instead, the truth escaped, raw and unpolished. He won't stop crying. May I? Rosalind approached slowly, as if afraid of startling him, as if he were an injured animal that might attack or flee. He nodded mutely, not trusting his voice. She knelt beside the chair, leaving the basket on the floor. Gentle fingers, without gloves despite the cold, touched the baby's forehead, descended the tiny cheek, checking temperature and health with familiarity suggesting experience. Hello, little one, she whispered, voice honey and silk. I know you're scared, but you're safe now. She looked at Sebastian, and there was something in her eyes, tenderness, understanding, something that made his chest tighten. Both of you are. It was absurd. He was a duke. She was a lady without dowry, a random baby, abandoned, without name or future. And yet, in that moment, it seemed the most real thing Sebastian had felt in years. "I lost a son," he heard himself say. The words came out raw, unpolished. "And my wife." Childbirth. 3 years ago. Rosalind's hand found his over the baby's blanket, warm fingers pressing through the fabric. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She didn't offer empty platitudes, didn't say he'd be fine or that time heals all wounds, didn't murmur about God's will or mysterious plans. She just held his hand and shared the weight in silence. The baby sighed, small body finally relaxing, finally sleeping. "I don't know how to stop feeling guilty," Sebastian confessed, voice broken. "I called the best doctors. I did everything, but it wasn't enough. It's never enough." "Some things," said Rosalind softly, "have no one to blame. They're just terrible and unfair." She squeezed his fingers. "But the guilt you carry doesn't honor them. Living would honor them." Sebastian looked at her, really looked. Simple hair escaping from practical hairdo, reformed dress with careful patches at the seams, face without classical beauty but with something better. Truth, courage, compassion without pity, strength without judgment. "How dare you?" he whispered, echoing his first words at that ball that seemed to have happened in a different life. "Be exactly what I need when I vowed never to need anyone?" Rosalind smiled. Sad, understanding, beautifully broken. "Perhaps," she replied. "Some of us are placed in each other's path precisely when we resist most." Rain continued falling. The baby slept, breathing soft and regular. And Sebastian Hartwell began, for the first time in 3 years, to believe he might be able to breathe without pain. The scandal began softly, like slow poison, whispers in tea rooms, voices lowering when Rosalind entered, then rising as soon as she passed. Sideways glances at balls, fans opening to hide malicious smiles. Lady Helena, Sebastian's cousin, spreading doubts with sweet smiles and innocently poisoned questions. "Isn't it curious how Lady Fairfax appears wherever Sebastian is? Naturally, she's desperate. Her father died in debt. Poor girl, using tragedy to capture a duke. So transparent." Rosalind felt the change. It wasn't sudden. It was slow erosion, like water wearing away stone. Invitations dried up like flowers without water. Old friends averted their eyes when they crossed paths on the street, suddenly fascinated by shop windows or clouds. Even Aunt Agatha began asking uncomfortable questions, voice laden with concern and unspoken disapproval. She should stop seeing him. She knew this. The logic was crystal clear. Distance herself, let the scandal die, preserve what remained of her reputation. But when Sebastian appeared in her garden at dawn, without announcing himself, without ceremony, without the protocol that governed every interaction in London society, she descended in her robe and stood barefoot on grass wet with dew. The cold bit her bare feet, but she barely noticed. Morning mist enveloped the garden in mystery, transforming everything into pearl and silver tones. "What are people saying?" he asked without preamble, standing among the roses his mother had planted years ago. "That I'm a fortune hunter." "Are you?" Rosalind should be offended. The question was insulting, direct, completely improper. Instead, she laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the quiet morning air. "If I were, Your Grace, I would have chosen a much less complicated target." He took a step forward, then another. He stopped so close she could see where he'd shaved hastily, leaving a small cut on his jaw still red. She could feel the heat emanating from him, cutting through the cold morning air. "Sebastian," he corrected for the 100th time, and there was almost desperation in his voice. "And you didn't choose." His voice descended. "Neither did I." "Then what are we doing?" "Something dangerous," he admitted. "Something impossible." He hesitated, then took something from his pocket. A small dark green velvet box, worn at the edges by time. "Something inevitable." Rosalind's heart stopped. "No." It's not a marriage proposal." He interrupted quickly, almost stumbling over the words. "Not yet. I know it's too soon, too inappropriate. But—" He opened the box with hands that trembled slightly. Inside was a silver brooch in the shape of a rose. Simple, elegant, completely unpretentious. The metal was slightly tarnished by time, each petal carved with meticulous care. "It was my mother's," said Sebastian softly, voice laden with memory. "She wore it every day, not because it was valuable, but because my father gave it to her on the day he finally admitted he loved her." His eyes met hers. It took 2 years. He was too stubborn to admit feelings. She was patient enough to wait. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know that, even if I need time to thaw, to learn to love without terror." He touched her face gently, first skin-to-skin contact since that day at the orphanage. His fingers were warm against her cheek, cold from the morning. "You make me want to try." Rosalind closed her eyes, feeling tears escape. They descended warm down her face, wetting his fingers. "Society will destroy us." "Let it," he said, fierce, voice low but intense as contained fire. "I've been destroyed before. I survived." He tilted his forehead against hers, breath mingling with hers in the narrow space between them. "But I don't know if I'd survive losing you before having the courage to truly have you." "Sebastian." He kissed her forehead, soft, reverent. A promise not of passion, but of something deeper. Commitment, choice, future. "You don't need to answer now, just—" He pressed the brooch into her hand, the cold metal against her warmed palm. "Know that there's a man here. Under Duke, under ashes, under 3 years of living death. And this man," voice broke, "this man wants to live again." Rosalind held the brooch, feeling its weight, not just the metal, but everything it represented. Hope, risk, the possibility of happiness and the certainty of pain if everything collapsed. And she knew with terrible and wonderful certainty that there was no longer a choice. She had already chosen him. The sun began to rise, burning through the mist, transforming the garden into gold and green. And there, barefoot on the wet grass, they remained, not touching beyond that brooch pressed between their hands, but connected by something stronger than physical contact. By promise. The letter arrived during breakfast. Anonymous, on cheap paper that contrasted cruelly with the fine porcelain and linen tablecloth. The handwriting was disguised, large, angular letters that seemed to want to scream. But the content was pure venom. Lady Fairfax, daughter of a bankrupt baron, is seducing the Duke of Greystone to save herself from poverty. She has been seen alone with him on multiple inappropriate occasions. The poor girl has no shame, using his mourning to manipulate him. Copies arrived at 50 noble houses. 50 matrons read it with morning tea. 50 times the poison spread. By the end of the day, all of London was talking. Rosalind faced everything with chin raised and heartbroken. Not because she believed Sebastian would abandon her, but because she knew he should. A duke had responsibilities. To his name, his family, the hundreds who depended on him. She was just her. Nobody. Less than nobody now, with reputation stained beyond recovery. What she didn't expect was his silence. Days passed. No visit, no message, no public defense. The silence echoed louder than any accusation, more painful than any direct rejection. Rosalind found herself looking out the window every time she heard horses, heart leaping and then sinking when it wasn't him. Lady Helena, radiant as cruel sun on a hangover day, appeared to offer support, each word dripping with false sympathy and true satisfaction. She wore pale pink, an improper color for a condolence visit, but perfect for celebrated victory. Poor dear. Naturally, Sebastian had to reconsider. He has responsibilities, reputation. She smiled, and there was triumph in her blue eyes. Surely you understand. Rosalind understood then, with clarity that cut like glass. Helena had written the letters. And Sebastian, pressured by advisors and the weight of his title, by Isabel's ghost and 300 years of family history's expectations, had chosen not her. At Greystone Mansion, Sebastian was at war. His lawyers insisted, reasonable voices presenting logical arguments, distance himself. Wait for the scandal to pass. Protect the Hartwell name. Your Grace, be sensible. The girl is nobody. We'll find an appropriate match when this passes. Helena begged tearfully, real tears rolling down flushed cheeks. Think of the family. This woman will ruin everything. The scandal, Sebastian. Don't you see what she's doing? The advisors warned with paternal gravity. A duke cannot be seen as a love-struck fool. Parliament watches. Your tenants watch. England watches. And Sebastian, for the first time in 3 years, felt divided. Between duty and desire. Between mourning he knew, familiar, safe in its pain, and love that terrified. Between being the duke everyone expected and the man Rosalind had seen holding a crying baby. Isabel had never challenged him, never made him feel neither joy nor pain, just that gray, dead existence. She had been safe, predictable, dead even before dying. Rosalind was fire, courage, gloriously alive. Looking at her was like looking at the sun, bright, warming, impossible to sustain without burning. And loving her meant risking the devastating pain of losing again. It meant opening an already shattered chest and offering the shards to someone who could pulverize them even more. So he committed the worst mistake. He hesitated. 1 week, just one. 7 days of silence while he fought himself. 7 nights without sleep, looking at the brooch she had returned to him. No, wait, that hasn't happened yet. 7 nights drinking cognac he didn't touch, watching fire that didn't warm, searching for courage that seemed to have abandoned him along with his dead wife. But it was enough. When he finally went to her, riding through London with heart pounding and prepared speech, he found the house closed. Dark windows, locked door, butler informing in icy tone that Lady Fairfax was not receiving visitors. Rosalind had departed for her aunt's estate in the country. Without farewell, without message, without chance to explain. Only the silver brooch left in the velvet box, returned through the butler with a note of 3 words in handwriting that trembled as she wrote, "I'm no coward." Sebastian held the brooch, cold metal in his palm, feeling the weight of everything he had lost for the second time. The silver rose seemed to accuse him. Broken promise, destroyed future, happiness thrown away out of fear. And he understood, too late, that the true coward was him. Not Rosalind, who faced scandal with head held high. Not Helena, whose malice was at least honest in its desperation. But him, Sebastian Hartwell, Duke of Greystone, who had all the power in the world and didn't have the courage to use any of it to protect the only thing that mattered, the only face that made him want to wake up in the morning. Derbyshire in May was everything London was not. Green, silent, honest. Rosalind walked through the gardens of Aunt Agatha's estate, trying to breathe without feeling glass in her lungs. The air here was different. Clean, perfumed with wildflowers and damp earth, without the coal smoke that always hung over London. Birds sang without competition from carriages and voices. The sky stretched vast and blue, uninterrupted by buildings and chimneys. She was stronger now, less broken. A lie. She was completely broken, just better at hiding it. She smiled at Aunt Agatha during meals, read books without processing a word, walked through the gardens as if appreciating the beauty, when in truth she just tried to tire herself enough to sleep without dreaming of gray eyes and unkept promises. Sebastian's letters arrived daily. She burned them unopened, watching the wax seal melt and darken, reducing unread words to ashes. She couldn't bear to read words that would come too late, apologies that wouldn't change anything. Lightning illuminated the sky in white and violent flashes. Thunder shook the windows. Rain hammered the roof like war drums. And through it all, urgent knocking at the door. Rosalind ran to the window, heart in her throat. She saw a figure staggering from the mount, soaked, exhausted. The horse, a magnificent stallion, was covered in foam, flanks trembling with effort. How long had he ridden? How many hours through a storm any sensible person would avoid? She would recognize that silhouette in any darkness. Sebastian. She descended running, forgetting propriety, forgetting resentment, wrapped only in nightgown and robe that billowed behind her like white wings, barefoot on cold stones that bit her feet. She opened the door before he could knock again. He was undone, completely, totally undone. Hair stuck to his face, dripping, clothes soaked, heavy with water, molding to his body. Mud splattered on his boots up to the knees, eyes wild with desperation and determination, glazed with exhaustion but burning with something stronger, need. "I can't," he gasped, voice hoarse and broken. "I can't live knowing you believe I chose fear over you." "Your Grace." "Sebastian," he spoke, voice breaking into something close to a sob. "Please, just Sebastian." Rosalind trembled, pressing the robe against her body. Rain entered through the open door, wetting her clothes, but she didn't move. "You hesitated." Yes, the raw admission surprised her. She expected denial, elaborate explanations, excuses, not naked and brutal truth. "I hesitated," he continued, entering without invitation, dripping on the expensive Persian carpet, leaving a trail of water and mud. "I hesitated because I'm terrified. Terrified of loving you and losing you, of having you and not being enough, of building something precious only for life to tear it away again, as it tore away everything I've ever loved." He took a deep breath, trembling, from cold or emotion, impossible to tell. "But I discovered something worse than that terror." "What?" "Living without trying." He took a step forward. Rosalind retreated instinctively. He stopped immediately, hands raising in surrender. "I won't touch you, I won't beg. Just—" He took something from his inner pocket, an envelope, carefully protected from rain by his jacket, dry when everything else about him was soaked. "Read, please." Rosalind took it with trembling hands. She opened it. It was a deed. Properties in Surrey and Kent, investments in railways and ships, a bank account with a sum that made her gasp, everything detailed in precise legal language. In her name, Rosalind Fairfax, not conditional on marriage, not dependent on any man. "What?" "Security," said Sebastian calmly, despite trembling. "So you never again depend on a man, title, or marriage. It's yours, without conditions. If you reject me today, it remains yours. If you accept me and later change your mind, it remains yours. If you marry me and I die tomorrow, it remains yours." His eyes burned into hers. "Because you deserve to choose for love, Rosalind. Not out of necessity. Not out of fear of poverty. For love or for nothing." She looked at the papers. A fortune that made her independent. Free. Rich in her own right. She would never again need to fear the future, never again depend on relatives' charity, never again be pressured into marriage out of desperation. Why? Because Sebastian knelt, water dripping from him forming a puddle on the floor, staining the expensive carpet even more. "The woman who challenged me in a ballroom deserves never to have to bow to anyone's power again." His voice broke. "Not even to mine." Rosalind dropped the papers. They fell, scattering across the floor like autumn leaves, fortune forgotten. "Stand up." "Not before." "Stand," she ordered, voice firm even through tears. "Because if you're going to make a declaration, Sebastian Hartwell, make it as a man equal to me, not as a duke at my feet, not as a supplicant, as an equal." He rose slowly, water dripping from him, hope and terror mixing in his face. They stood face to face, she in nightclothes, he soaked to the bone, both trembling. Rosalind took a step forward. She touched his face with hesitant hand, feeling unshaven beard rough against her palm, skin cold from rain but burning underneath. "You vowed never to love again. I broke that vow the moment your eyes challenged mine. Society. Let it burn. Your family. You're my family now, if you'll have me." Rosalind closed her eyes, fighting tears, against hope, against love so immense it terrified, that threatened to swallow everything, that promised joy and guaranteed pain. "I'm still afraid," she whispered. "So am I," he admitted, forehead leaning against hers, breaths mingling. "But I'd rather be afraid together with you than safe and alone. I'd rather risk destruction by your side than guarantee emptiness without you." And there, in the dark foyer while the storm raged outside, Rosalind finally let herself fall, not into his arms, not yet, but into the truth of what they felt, imperfect, terrifying, real. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay tonight, in a separate room appropriately, but stay." Sebastian nodded, not trusting his voice. And when they finally separated, when Rosalind went up to her room and he to the guest quarters with dry clothes provided by a shocked butler, they both knew. The story hadn't ended. It was just beginning. 3 days had passed since Sebastian's stormy arrival. 3 days of long conversations that stretched through the afternoons, comfortable silences that didn't need filling, and slow rebuilding of trust like weaving a tapestry, thread by thread, patiently. He had stayed as an appropriate guest, sleeping in a separate room in the other corridor, but each morning they had breakfast together in the dining room bathed in golden light. Each afternoon they walked through the gardens, maintaining respectful distance, but allowing hands to brush occasionally, accidentally, inevitably. The letter arrived on the 4th morning. A servant brought it with the usual mail, along with invitations that didn't matter and bills that could wait. Rosalind recognized the handwriting immediately. Delicate, perfect, each letter formed with studied precision, unmistakably Helena's. Her first instinct was to tear it up without reading, but something, curiosity, perhaps a need to understand, made her open it. "Dear Lady Fairfax, I must confess, it was I who spread the rumors. I've loved Sebastian since I was a girl, and jealousy blinded me. But yesterday, he came to my house and did something I'll never forget. He didn't rebuke me, didn't threaten me. He simply asked, 'Would you be happy knowing you destroyed my happiness to have a piece of me that never existed?' I realized then my madness. He would never be mine, not because he chose you, but because I'm not the kind of person he could love. You're brave. I'm a coward. Please forgive. And if you can, be happy for both of us." Helena Rosalind folded the letter slowly, fingers tracing the creases carefully. She found Sebastian in the garden, among roses blooming in an explosion of color, red, white, pale pinks that seemed to blush under the morning sun. "You went to her," she said, not asking. Sebastian turned, white shirt gleaming under the light, without coat or vest. He seemed younger this way, less duke, and more just a man enjoying a spring morning. "Yes, and you showed mercy. I showed truth." He indicated the stone bench, and both sat, maintaining respectful distance. Bees hummed among the flowers, indifferent to human dramas. Helena grew up believing title equaled love. That possession was the same as affection. He sighed, looking at the green horizon stretching infinitely. Life in aristocracy teaches this, especially to women. We're all pieces on a board, traded for alliances and lands. "You forgave her." I understood. There's a difference. He finally looked at her, and there was sadness in his eyes. Forgiveness suggests moral superiority. Understanding recognizes that, in different circumstances, I could have done worse. Rosalind looked at him. Really looked. This man who was a duke but had chosen to kneel on wet carpet, who had been cruel in mourning but gentle in awakening, who carried so much pain but offered so much compassion, who had ridden through a storm for her, risking pneumonia and worse. "Who are you really, Sebastian Hartwell?" He smiled, sadly, beautifully, like sun through rain clouds. "A man who lost everything and believed survival meant never having anything again." He turned to her completely. "But you showed me that survival without life isn't victory. It's just slow existence, deferred death. I'm no savior." "No," he agreed quickly. "You're a mirror. And in your gaze, I saw for the first time in 3 years, not what I lost, but what I could still have. Not Isabel's ghost, but the possibility of a future. Silence descended, not uncomfortable, but full of weight. Birds sang, wind whispered through the leaves. The world continued turning, indifferent to hearts healing slowly. "If I say yes," Rosalind began calmly, looking at her gloved hands, "society will never fully accept me. I'll always be the fortune hunter who captured the Duke. There will always be whispers, false smiles, invitations that won't come. Then we'll move to Derbyshire permanently. Build life here, far from London and its poisons." He gestured to the surrounding fields. "There's work to do here, tenants to care for, reforms to implement. Real life, not ballroom theater. Would you love that? Leaving London Parliament, everything you know?" "I would love you," he corrected, voice descending to intense whisper. "The rest is negotiable. London is stones and politics. You are—" He paused, searching for words. "You are breathing." Rosalind laughed, a sound half cry, half joy. "It's a lot. Too much?" She turned to him, taking his hands. For the first time, both without gloves, skin against skin, warmth against warmth, fingers intertwining with familiarity that seemed impossible for so little time together. "When I saw you holding that baby," she confessed, voice trembling, I knew that under the Duke, under the ice, there was a man who could love so deeply he would break under its weight." She squeezed his fingers. "And I wanted to be strong enough to help you carry it, to divide the weight until it didn't seem crushing." "You are," Sebastian whispered, voice hoarse, "stronger than anyone I've known, braver, more true." "Then yes," she said simply. "Yes to trying. Yes to risking. Yes to building something together, one day at a time." She smiled through tears that finally fell free. "Yes to you, Sebastian. To us." He didn't move for a moment, just looked, as if engraving her face in memory. Each detail, the way sunlight gilded her brown hair, the curve of her tear-wet cheeks, the tremulous smile that promised a future. Then slowly, so slowly she could have pulled away at any moment, he leaned in. He stopped inches from her lips, breath warm against her mouth. "May I?" Instead of answering, Rosalind closed the distance. The kiss was soft, tentative, trembling with all the emotions neither knew how to name. It wasn't fire or unbridled passion as romances described. It was deeper than that. Recognition of souls, promise of presence, commitment to uncertain future. It was promise. It was healing. It was beginning again. When they separated, Sebastian pressed his forehead against hers, eyes closed, breathing irregular. Tears, his, hers, impossible to distinguish, wet both faces. "I'll mess everything up sometimes. So will I. I'll be afraid. So will I. Oh, but I'll try. Every day." He opened his eyes, and there was clarity there that didn't exist before. Determination, hope. "I swear by everything I am, I'll try." "Then," said Rosalind, smiling through tears, "we'll try together." And there, in the Derbyshire garden, while the sun rose higher in the cloudless blue sky, two broken hearts began to learn that sometimes, just sometimes, the cracks are where the light enters. That perfection isn't the absence of scars, but the courage to continue despite them. That love isn't never being afraid, but choosing to love anyway. The return to London was a declaration of war. Sebastian sent no formal announcement, asked no permission. He simply appeared at Lady Ashford's ball with Rosalind on his arm, wearing the silver brooch everyone recognized as belonging to the late Duchess mother. The symbol couldn't be clearer if he had shouted his intentions from atop St. Paul's. The carriage stopped in front of the illuminated mansion. Rosalind could hear music escaping through open windows, a Strauss waltz, laughter, the murmur of hundreds of conversations. Her stomach churned. "There's still time," said Sebastian softly, holding her hand. "We can return to Derbyshire. You don't have to face this." "Yes," she replied, raising her chin. "I do. We do." They climbed the steps together. The silence was deafening. Not instantaneous. It spread like waves. The first person to see them choked, turned to their neighbor, whispered urgently. The news ran like fire in dry straw. Conversations died. Dancers stopped. The string quartet stumbled, violins creaking discordantly before falling completely silent. 300 pairs of eyes turned. And unlike that first night, there was no curiosity. There was shock, scandal, condemnation. Rosalind felt each gaze like a blade. She could hear whispers beginning, words like audacity, shame, absurd, floating through air heavy with perfume and judgment. Her legs trembled, but Sebastian squeezed her arm gently, an anchor in the storm. Helena was there, near the fireplace, pale blue dress making her ethereal against white marble, visibly nervous, hands intertwined with force that whitened her fingers. When Sebastian greeted her with genuine courtesy, not cold, not formal, but truly kind, and presented Rosalind without hesitation or shame, something changed in her face. Helena curtsied deeply, not to him, to Rosalind, a silent request for forgiveness, public humiliation as penance. Rosalind extended her hand. Helena took it as if it were a lifeline, tears glistening in her blue eyes before falling, staining expensive silk. Society watched, shocked. Murmurs exploded. This wasn't in the script. Victim forgiving villain? A fallen lady being kind to the one who destroyed her? Then Sebastian did something unprecedented. He requested silence by gently tapping his cane on the marble floor. The sound echoed like a shot, and he spoke. "Lords and ladies," his voice echoed through the hall, commanding absolute attention in the way only dukes can. "I know there are rumors. I know there are judgments." He looked around, meeting the eyes of each important person, daring them to look away first. "Allow me to clarify. Lady Rosalind Fairfax did not pursue me. I pursued her." Murmurs exploded like a swarm of angry bees. He raised his hand, and silence returned, fearful. "I pursued her because, for the first time in 3 years, someone saw me not as a title, but as a man. Because she had courage I didn't have." His voice gained intensity. "Because when all of you treated me with empty reverence, avoiding me as if pain were contagious, she treated me with truth." He turned to Rosalind, taking her hand and raising it for all to see. The silver brooch gleamed under candlelight. "And if this offends your sensibilities, if this stains reputations, if this defies conventions," his gaze swept the hall, fierce and defiant, "then I gladly defy it all." Lord Pembroke, a 70-year-old man with a reputation for inflexibility and unwavering conservatism, stepped forward. His face was red, white mustache trembling with indignation. "Your Grace, with all due respect, you're allowing emotion to cloud judgment. This lady saved my life," Sebastian interrupted calmly, but there was steel in his voice. "Not from physical danger, from something worse. Slow death inside while pretending to be alive." He looked directly at Pembroke. "And if love is a disease, my lord, then I gladly die from it." Absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Then, from the back of the hall, a young, clear voice. "I heard Lady Fairfax initiated reform in child labor conditions." It was the young Earl of Ashworth, a progressive known for radical ideas, watching with genuine interest. Other young lords near him nodded, curious. "It's true," Sebastian confirmed, allowing himself to smile slightly. "She wrote a detailed proposal. I presented it to the lords in Parliament. 6 have already implemented changes. Others are considering." "And the orphanage?" "She visits weekly, without announcement, without glory, without photographers to document charity." His voice filled with pride. "Some people do good because it's right, not because it's seen." The tide was turning. Rosalind could feel it. Not completely. Never completely. Older faces still frowned in disapproval. Matrons still whispered behind fans. But the younger ones, the progressives, those tired of suffocating old rules, they were listening. Lady Pembroke, wife of the inflexible lord, approached. For a moment, Rosalind feared another attack, more public judgment. Instead, the elderly lady smiled, genuinely softly, like a grandmother seeing her granddaughter. "My daughter died in childbirth 20 years ago," she said softly, just loud enough for Rosalind to hear, voice trembling with ancient memory. I watched Greystone die along with his wife, watched him become a ghost. She took Rosalind's hand with fragile but firm fingers. Thank you for bringing him back to the world of the living. That broke the ice. Not everyone. Many would still disapprove. Many would still whisper. Many would never accept. But enough approached, offering polite greetings, careful courtesies, that the night ended not in disaster, but in cautious possibility. When they were finally alone in the carriage back, curtains closed against curious eyes, Rosalind leaned against Sebastian, exhausted to her bones. Her entire body ached from finally released tension. That was terrifying, reckless, necessary, all of that. She laughed weakly. And possibly social suicide. He kissed the top of her head, lips pressing against her hair. Are you still certain? More than ever. Because now she understood, with clarity that only comes from surviving battle. True love didn't mean defying the world and winning. It meant defying the world and not caring about the result, as long as they stayed together. It meant choosing person over position, truth over approval, heart over convenience. The world could judge them, but it couldn't separate them. Not anymore. The night of the formal proposal was intimate. Weeks had passed, navigating the scandal together, facing society side by side. Attending dinners where some ignored them, others greeted them coldly, and a few, precious few, received them with genuine warmth. But there was still no ring, no official kneeling, no words that would make it real before the world. Not just a private promise, but a public commitment that neither society nor law could undo. No crowds, no theatricality, just the two of them in Greystone's garden, under June's starry sky stretching infinite and black, speckled with distant diamonds. The air was perfumed with jasmine and night roses. Crickets sang their endless symphony. The crescent moon hung low on the horizon, a silver smile of approval. It was a perfect night, neither cold nor hot, just the exact temperature where the world seems to hold its breath. Sebastian had planned an elaborate speech. He'd rehearsed in his study, carefully chosen words about honor, duty, eternal love. He forgot everything. He knelt on grass, still damp with afternoon dew, feeling moisture penetrate expensive trousers. He took a small velvet box from his pocket, with hands that trembled slightly. Rosalind Fairfax. His voice trembled slightly, emotion breaking through aristocratic control. You already know I love you. You already know I choose you every day, but now. He opened the box, revealing a ring of emeralds and diamonds. 3 emeralds, green as her eyes, surrounded by small diamonds that captured moonlight and multiplied it into tiny rainbows. Now I ask officially, will you be my wife, my duchess, my partner in everything? Rosalind looked at the ring, delicate, but not ostentatious. Antique, she realized, by the style of the setting. Perfect, absolutely perfect. Didn't you tell me to kneel as an equal? She teased gently, but tears glistened in her eyes. He smiled, that complete and true smile she had worked so hard to unearth from beneath layers of ice. That was when I asked forgiveness. Now I'm asking for your hand, and for that. His eyes gleamed, reflecting stars. For that, I kneel with joy, with honor, with gratitude that you exist. Then yes. Rosalind extended her hand, allowing him to slide on the ring. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. 1,000 times yes. Sebastian rose, but not immediately. First he kissed her hand, lips pressing against skin where the ring now resided. Then her wrist, feeling accelerated pulse throbbing against his mouth. Then her palm, an intimate and reverent kiss. He removed the glove from her other hand slowly, revealing pale skin under moonlight. He kissed each finger, one by one, as if it were a sacred ritual, as if he were memorizing the texture of her skin, the warmth of her body, the reality of her presence. When he finally stood, he pulled her against him, one hand on her waist, feeling curve through silk dress, the other entwined in her hair, carefully undoing the pins until curls fell free. He stopped, lips almost touching hers, breath mingling. "One thing," he whispered. "Yes, I love you." He smiled softly, and there was wonder in his voice, as if he still didn't quite believe he had permission to say this. "I needed to say it first. Needed you to hear it before anything else. I love you too, you impossible lord." He silenced her with the kiss. It was everything the first one wasn't. Deep, desperate, full of months of contained desire, overcome fear, love finally not just admitted, but proclaimed. Her hands found his hair, pulling him closer as if a centimeter's distance were intolerable. He lifted her slightly, her feet leaving the ground, and she laughed against his lips, a sound of pure joy. When they finally separated, both breathless, Sebastian pressed his forehead against hers. "I'll live to make you happy." "You'll live," she corrected, fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "And that already makes me happy. Just living. Just being here, present, not a ghost, but a man." He held her face as if it were something sacred, precious beyond measure. "How dare you?" he echoed for the last time, smiling. "Become absolutely indispensable?" "The same way," she replied, eyes shining with tears and starlight, "that you dared to look back at that ball. And there, under silent witness stars, infinite sky watching with ancient approval, they understood. It hadn't been defiance that united them. Not scandal, not drama, not manipulative destiny. It had been recognition. Two broken souls seeing in each other the possibility of being whole again. Not because they fit perfectly, but because their imperfections complemented each other. Because their scars told stories that only another wounded heart could truly understand. Love wasn't never being broken. It was choosing to heal together.